Tennessee, David Tulis.
We face a national disaster. Just look at the amount of debt as a percentage of household median income. In 1980, it was 79% total government and personal debt. In 2000, it was 280%. And last year, 2016, it was 584% total debt as a percentage of household median income. What that means is that there's 5 times more debt that exists than the average of all the households put together, and piled up, added up. You have a mountain of debt. Now that debt is not going to be payable, and because we face a crisis in confidence as to the repayment, we are facing a disaster. You, my listener, be ready to lose half your net worth in the meltdown ahead. The 2008 was just a Wall Street, a canyon of Wall Street presaging of the larger spread in the economy when it happens again. And there will be a swan trigger event. And on account of this bleak prognosis, I have a word of encouragement and advice, and that is to divest national and invest local. Have your own little business. Start something now. Have another income stream. Don't rely solely on your employment now, because you don't know your field, right? Just being an employee, you don't have any care about the larger picture of your line of work. Your employer worries about that. You're just employed. And so you tend to have a very constricted and narrow view of your particular area. And you're very vulnerable to a sudden rupture that, even if you are reading the Wall Street Journal pretty carefully, you won't have seen coming in your own employment. So then suddenly there goes that $90,000 a year job, and you are suddenly putting out feelers for employment and calling friends and other fields. You're attending meet and greets at the Chamber of Commerce and the like. Tonight, the City Council will be voting on second reading. I believe they'll be taking a vote on the ban on the internet. There's a Beijing Wall of China proposed by Chip Henderson, a contractor and a builder, a conservative, right? These are conservatives, and even the liberal members of the city council, Dr. Carol Burrs, for example, she's a typical politically liberal, Democrat-oriented person. They all are behind the Beijing move by Chip Henderson to create a special district. And in this district, there will be a privilege, the exercise of a privilege, which is actually a right. You have a right to have any harmless activity in your house that doesn't injure anybody. That would be, say, an Airbnb network membership, where you bring visitors in from around the world to stay in Chattanooga and stay in your house when you're not there. And a very, very welcoming option for people who are traveling and want to see the inside of an American home, right, as opposed to just looking at the world through from the balcony of a hotel downtown. That will be prohibited and banned and verboten among hundreds and hundreds, thousands of homeowners. Will be forbidden to do this, and others will be allowed to do it by permission. You have to ask permission from the city council and its economic development office. Mrs. Williams there will be surveying the internet and filing citations and filing reports. Very, very Beijing-esque, very, very party-oriented, red party-oriented maneuver. And that's going to be happening today. I judging by the discussion last Tuesday, I'd say that the council is going to go for it, though there should be some of the new candidates said absolutely nothing. Erskine Oglesby did not let his views be known. Demetrius Coonrod, who I think would have, I think she would tend to have skepticism of another police maneuver, which is what this is. She said nothing at the meeting, and the other newcomer to the council also did not speak either. So I can't gauge by their public comments what their views are. And even the conservatives like Ken Smith, his concern was for the details, not the principle of the liberty of thousands of homeowners and future homeowners in Chattanooga, if this ban is not overturned in court, that would be stifled in their exercise of the delights of the gig city brand, right? The gig city brand is touting ourselves around the world, the highest speed internet in just virtually anywhere on the planet, anywhere in the galaxy. And here now we are going to pretend that we're members of the Red Party in Beijing, clamping down on dissent, clamping down on the free market, clamping down on advertisements for Airbnb memberships or memberships in any other network, home sharing network, that brings a revenue stream to the householder. And we really should have, I think we really need to be careful, and we need to ask ourselves, what is local economy? And it is one way of making the argument for local economy is to describe what it's not. And Joe Sobran in a Lou Rockwell piece yesterday is really very helpful on this point. So I'm borrowing my analysis from his discussion and his distinction between patriotism and nationalism. He has a great quote from one of my favorite writers, G.K. Chesterton, and a very famous essay on Rudyard Kipling. And he's Kipling was the poet everybody reads in high school, and who was kind of a defender of British imperialism. And he said that Kipling and Chesterton says that Kipling suffers from a lack of patriotism or patriotism. He admires England, but he does not love her. For we admire things with reasons, but we love them without reasons. He admires England because she is strong, not because she is English. And here now is that analysis for us, and that would be between the two sides of the American character. And you, my listener, are probably on the nationalist side. I'm willing to bet that you are a nationalist. You're probably a Republican, and you believe in force. You're probably someone who said, well, just nuke them and let God sort them out. That's the kind of thing that would come from your mouth. And I would just simply look at you and say, well, could we discuss that maybe? Are you really thinking about what you're saying? And here's what Kipling's problem was. He loved England because she was great, right? Not because she was English. And so it's not acceptable if you're a nationalist American, to be number 4, right, or number 16 in the ranking of nations. You have got to be number 1. But if you're a local economy guy like me, it's okay to be number 10 or number 15. You don't have to be number 1. You don't have to have the biggest army and the biggest national debt and the most firefights going at the same time over other nations. That's really not important. In fact, it's probably something that a local economy guy, a patriot, would criticize. So on the local economy side, you have family love, and you respect the love of other people because you have a familial instinct. You respect the love of other people. So that would be a Brazilian who loves his country, or an Irishman who loves his country. If you're an Irishman who's a nationalist, there's nothing ever laughable about the Irish character, Sobran says. But if you're an Irish patriot, you laugh at the Irish, right? You laugh at the Irish. At their pigheadedness, at their poverty, at their famines and their recovery from the famines, and the like. There are many vices. Charles Darwin hated the Irish. He thought that they were the lowest form of life on the earth, and that's a typical English prejudice. And so, if you're an Irish patriot, you just laugh at that kind of thing. You say, there's some truth in that, and you move on. But if you're a patriot, well, you're sitting there ready to light the fuse on a bomb to knock down the reviewing stands that the Queen is going to be sitting on in a few minutes. If you're local, you have kind of an affection for your country. You view your country in terms of affection. But if you're a nationalist, you view your country in terms of rivalry, in terms of hostility to other countries. Resentment at China, resentment at Korea, resentment at the Russians. Why are people, why do they have such a big opinion about the Russians? What on earth does it matter? Why are the Russians so important? Well, that's because you're a nationalist, right? And you're not really sufficiently in tune with the David Tulis program here at Nooga Radio, where we just kind of laugh at those things and say that they're not really that important. And the reason they're not important is because they're not part of rebuilding Chattanooga and rebuilding our identification with our place, right? The place in which God has providentially placed us, right? That's even if ill happens to you here in Chattanooga, or even if ill happens to you in your town where God has ordained to put you, right? it's not for no purpose. It is for a purpose. And I would suggest here, just briefly, in a Sunday school moment, that it is your duty to find out what God has in your distress for you being here in Chattanooga. You thought it was all going to be great and smooth, but you arrived here with your family and bought a house, started a big mortgage, and suddenly you lost your job, and you find that the market has fallen out in that industry, and you're stuck. So you're feeling really terrible. Even so, my listener, good things are ahead for you. If you're a local economy guy and a patriot, you are a peace-oriented person. You're peaceful. You're pacific until forced to fight. Now that's important, because a patriot is defensive in his perspective about his country, and yet our nationalists, they are the belligerent ones. They are bellicose. They are militant. They are hollering for a bigger budget in defense spending, right? And they like Trump for going deeper into debt for defense spending. For a patriot, America is home, right? America's home. America and the United States, they're really kind of alike. They're very similar. But if you're a nationalist, well, America is always right. You've got this ideal of American perfectionism, America making the world safe for democracy, as President Wilson proposed it. And you are really trying to perfect or make perfect an abstraction. These are abstractions, and they are ideologies. They're nationalist religious ideologies about the great America, the great United States. And your nationalist impulse has a very hard edge on it. There's no mercy in it. There's no humor. There's no grace. There's no home front kind of thing, even though we have a Department of Homeland Security. That the word homeland by George W. Bush, I think, is a very smart move in marketing. That the Department of Homeland Security has, in its view, the least interest in homeland. Right, a homeland is the place with which people identify. The Department of Homeland Security is not about identification with homeland and to make people love their homeland. It is at every turn about oppression of travelers, oppression of strangers, about harassment at the borders. It is about controls, locks, cells, prisons, armaments, armor plate, rows of people begging to get through, and there is the Department of Homeland Security. It's about police action, right? It's about the police state. It's about occupation by Washington of the homeland, which is to say the states of the people and their personal interests and their personal claims to land, right? That's what we don't have in local economy. In local economy, it's relaxed, right? It's relaxed. In national economy, in nationalism, everything is rigid. You've got this national greatness at risk threat. We've got the threat of Islam. We've got the threat of Russians. We've got the threat of Koreans. The CBS News trills with alarm that Korea has done something today, that Korea has said something or done something. This rigidity favors American exceptionalism. I think that's the word, the key word. And of course, in American exceptionalism, that is the exporting of democracy, the exporting of freedom. Here we have the demolition of the World Trade Center towers, and President Bush nobly goes before the country and says, we are going to defend freedom around the world. You have a right to freedom. And they hate us because we're free. Well, no, they don't hate us because we're free. They hate us because we're over there, right? Just as Southerners, even today, hate Yankees and resent Yankees, resent Washington. They have not ended the war that brought about their humiliation, the humiliation of their ancestors and their peoples. All across the South, this is a common sentiment. Northerners, people in the Midwest, people in California, when they come here, they can't believe that we're still fighting the war in our breasts. They just don't understand it. And yet it's true that we do, because we represent an idea. And you can't defeat an idea of independence, of self-government, of self-determination by force, right? That desire is still there. And I think people are perhaps somewhat more ripe than they were in the 1960s and 1980s for the prospect of independence. But what has to happen first, though, is that the lights go out in Washington because the bills are not being paid, right? We have our great friend, the national debt, which will consume at some point all of politics, so that all that politics is going to be about is the last 2% or last 3% of the national budget that's called discretionary, right? The area of politics. The rest of the budget are considered to be non-discretionary and compulsory. And so we have that. When it gets down to that small, there will not be, we'll have the old people's lobby finally gaining against the military-industrial complex. And the old people will continue to get their checks, though the pentagram will be stifled, hopefully down to maybe just one part of the 5 parts of that building, and everybody else has had to go home, take unemployment, right, on either Virginia or Maryland. Patriotism wants to leave people alone. Patriotism is about local economy. It's about the freedom of people to do what God has ordained them to do in their local area. Now, that could be on the internet, right? That could be in the digital economy where your customers are worldwide. As Bill Arnold has the man with whose wife we spoke this morning, who's right now in Sessions Court in Savannah, Tennessee, in Hardin County, where she's facing a charge. She's been accused of exercising her constitutional rights and criminally charged with doing that. This is a remarkable thing. So we're people not deserving, really, of liberty, though she is, because she knows what her rights are and is defending them. But nationalism doesn't want to leave people alone. American nationalism is particularly Yankee-oriented. And Yankee in its take. Yankeeism is Puritanism gone bad. Yankeeism is the Reformed faith gone to seed, if you will, not developed, turning gnarled and inward-looking. In fact, rejecting God's law and rejecting God's sovereign decree. That's what's happened in the Yankee theory, which is allied with Unitarianism and Unitarian thinking on the whole in many areas in public policy. And that those two concepts have shaped American public policy probably since the 1880s, the Great Reform and progressive era. On one hand here, we've got patriotism, we've got local economy. Again, that it says leave people alone. We love our country. We don't need to be hating other people because they love their country. We don't need to be angry that other people are angry with us because we've invaded them, right? Why are we can accept that people want to be left alone. People don't want to be occupied. They don't want to see strange armored cars driving down their streets. They don't want to see people speaking strange tongues, meaning Southern, in their streets and banging down their doors and rushing through their apartments, scaring the children, shouting things that no one understands, right? These are Americans talking Southern in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's not leaving people alone. Yet local economy would say, that's really the best thing. We don't need to be over there. We need to be about cutting back on the Leviathan that has strangled local economy and is about to be the death of it through the central bank's dollar, the Federal Reserve note. That's in the lifeblood of local economy, and we can't get rid of it. It's not going to happen for some time until rolling crises, finally get people to say, we can do our business by means other than the paper dollar. Local economy says leave people alone. National economy and nationalism are about spreading abstractions by war, by mass business, by political conventions among nations. Those are called they're called treaties, but they're really not treaties. They're conventions. Treaties are a different animal entirely legally than a convention. A convention doesn't have the force of law domestically, but a treaty does. That's an important distinction to note. If it's a treaty, it has authority over the Constitution in the United States, but a convention or an agreement does not. And that's simply because it's about corporations led, I guess, or overseen, I guess, by the largest corporation of all, the United States government, which if there were a for-profit entity, that's it, right? That is it, feeding thousands and thousands of businesses, a few thousand of the elites and their families and their nonprofits and their trusts and their charities and their private universities and private operations, all seeking profit effectively on the public dime, while you, my listener, enjoy a debased currency the value declining every month a little bit more, while they the good people who are all up behind the national spirit, right? They're behind the national wars. They need us to be in fear. They need us to be in fear for our security. That's how they stay in charge, because we're not confident of ourselves. We're not confident about local economy and the free market. We're not confident about Chattanooga. We're not confident about our place in Hamilton County or in this corner of Tennessee. We are fearful. And because they have made us fearful by their nationalism, by their foreign wars, we need them more than ever. We need Washington. We need to have more security. We need to have better surveillance. We need to have more police forces. We need to hire more cops. We need more federal subsidies for police officers, for armored cars, for MRAPs, for machine guns, for Barrett 50 cals, with Chief Fred Fletcher with his finger on the trigger. David Tulis.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM. The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.